I want to offer some assurance, and not to quibble with the gentleman in the back of the room, but you will see hundreds of millions of dollars worth of PV installations on the LIPA service territory in the next 2 to 3 years. The reason is because of the currency value of clean electricity going forward. I know all the panelists in one form or another, except our great visitor from Boston. Peter Lynch is correct that what we do need ultimately is a diminution in system cost, which is a factor of the dollars that it takes to put the system cost in place, coupled with a greater yield from the system. But I want to insert parenthetically, the gentleman said $10 million houses will never see PV. First of all, we shouldn't be thinking just about rooftop mounting at the residential scale. I'll get to that in just a minute, but to disprove that theory once and for all, Aspen, Colorado is where the billionaires ran the millionaires out of town. And in Aspen, Colorado, we actually see these billionaires competing to see who can green their gazillion-dollar mansions faster than the other. We're not going to see any substantial resistance on the Gold Coast, on the north shore of Long Island in the first instance, and in the second instance, it's not about what you put on the roof of the residence. As we look at the penetration of PV across the utility sector, as Dr. Richard Perez, who's already been mentioned, has pointed out, the built rooftops of the 5 boroughs of New York City comprise an opportunity to generate all the electricity that's needed during the sunlight hours in New York. Con Ed has acknowledged at the New York Solar Summit that the development opportunity is north of 9 gigawatts. That is to say, 6 or 7 times either of the Indian Point units. The potential market development on the Con Ed and LIPA territories offer the entering into the wedge for gigawatt scale development for our state and its concomitant economic development and industrial development opportunity. We will see a maturing of these offerings over time that Peter has predicted, that Dr. Fury has discussed. But let me give you the state of the art, because I just came from a conference talking about devoting very, very quickly billions of dollars of private long-term capital, ramping to tens of billions and hundreds of billions of private capital. Some of the thought leaders of the world are engaged, and I'm humbled by the opportunity to bring the news. This money is going to go very quickly into the category, and it's feasible at today's production efficiencies and today's cost of system because of the currency value of the electricity going forward in time. We see insurance policies guaranteeing performance for 27 and a half and even 30 years of production right now. And when we talk about high electricity costs in the target markets, as far as our region is concerned, that's at blended rates at 22-cent power, 23-cent power. As others have touched on, Jeff Peterson's graph showed a load reduction at a 10 gigawatt penetration, which is entirely reasonable in the 5 boroughs. When we play this out over time, we will see the kind of progress Dr. Curry and Mr. Lynch have talked about, which will make this even more affordable. But I'm referring back to Dr. Perez when he points out that if we stop having a blended rate and we talk about the real efficacy of PV, it is at addressing the peak load issues at peak load prices. So if peaking power is really worth 46 cents and the cost of our installed PV today is between $3 and $4 system cost at utility scale, and at the end of the day, that's about 16 or 18 cents per kilowatt hour power, then we're already at grid parity in the state of New York in the high value markets. And I could go on and on for days, but let me just add a comfort factor that we need to move on from here what this industry is worth doing right now and worth investing billions of dollars in the state of New York, creating hundreds of thousands of jobs and billions of dollars worth of industrial and deployment activity.
Great, wonderful comment. No, I think there's another point too is, so in that, following on that question or comment, so the pricing that Richard's talking about, where does that show up in the finance and the banking side and the insurance of the guarantee? Who needs to be guided or trained or to look at it in a different context of peak pricing versus blended? And who's imposing the blended assumption, I guess?
The problem is in an antiquated approach at our Public Service Commission. All of those officials, engineers, actuaries, because they're really involved in predicting what's going to be in the future. We have policies in place, 45 by 15. If we really understand the 45 by 15 goal, it involves gigawatt shifts in overall result. And those gigawatt shifts are not being addressed by current policy. It's not for me to say how utilities should be priced in the state of New York, but the truth of the matter is, peaking power is worth several times what the overall electric rate is worth. So Rick, whose leadership has been remarkable in this sector, I'm pleased to know him and to admire his enterprise. But when Rick talks about a failure of policy, we have magnificent intentions in New York and in the Northeast. If we look to California, notwithstanding all the problems they're having in implementation, they're already soaring ahead. We have utility scale electric generation both on the distributed model and on the central station model in the hundreds of megawatts committed and funded. So the answer, if we want to move ahead in clean energy, the answer is we've got to understand the value of the product and drive the capital. And the final thing is that the holders of long-term capital are more than willing to go 25 and 30 years at 400 to 500 basis points. So the takeout is already there. What we need is the policies that ease the way, then the project finance, the role of commercial lending will make these things happen, and the long-term takeout will constantly recirculate that capital into paying for more product. I could go on for days, but that's
well, I think New York has addressed that early on. That's the whole kind of model of the Power Authority doing public institutions, because you know that the ownership of that institution will be around for 20, 30 years. It probably runs into a problem if you were to try to do the same thing for a residence. The residence gets in trouble with their mortgager, who owns the house after that, and meanwhile you've got you did the financing on the energy associated with it. It seems a lot more complicated. But maybe
I think a point that Randolph makes, is certainly a good one, is in that it's also a business opportunity. Is that you have to look at your PV system, and from whether or not you get time of day rates, real-time pricing, how can I deliver that value to that building? It could be that I need to be able to guarantee power to the utility if I'm getting a demand rate, a real-time rate. How that building interacts with the utility may change. So I may have a PV system that has load control, has short-term storage, has something else on it, so I can capture that value. I think there are opportunities here somewhere. And also I mentioned the work actually that Richard Perez has been doing for us in forecasting. Again, that's another value this PV system can bring to the marketplace. So there are opportunities in all these issues that come up.
Another question. Okay, a few more. How about right here?
If I were to look at the market today, what % of PV installations are residential versus what % are commercial? So that's question number one. question number 2, is that ratio going to change over the next 5 years? And then question number 3, is there a value to solar trackers that, by definition, track the sun, so increase the efficiency or the energy output per square, whatever the measurement is, per panel? So,
Well, maybe I can answer the first 2 questions. From New York's perspective, the PV market anywhere essentially driven by incentives. In New York, the incentives have been pushing installations at the smaller level. So the bulk of the installations right now are at the residential level, maybe until NYPA's 100 megawatt program comes about. If you went to New Jersey, for example, which has a different incentive type program based on SRECs, I would guess that the bulk in a megawatt basis is on the commercial side. And that has to do with how their incentive structure is set up. I can let somebody else talk about trackers.
Our sense, we've let out a big bid for a lot of solar in New York State, and just to give you a little sense that there's very little interest from businesses that are going to try to squeeze out as much profit as they can from installing, owning, and operating PV systems for 20 years in New York State to use trackers. So that might answer your question. What we sort of feel is that in the Northeast, trackers make a little less sense than they might in a desert climate for a couple reasons. One,